When my wife passed away, I thought the grief itself would be the heaviest blow life could deliver. But then the day after my own son proved me wrong. Before I share the rest of this story, please take a moment to subscribe to D-Daily Stories so you won't miss more real-life tales filled with raw emotions, twists, and lessons worth remembering. You can't bring mom back, and my wife's birthday is only once a year, he said. It wasn't just the words, it was the casual way they rolled off his tongue as if he were discussing the weather. They struck me harder than any insult, cutting through my grief and leaving a raw wound I didn't know how to close. I barely slept that night. I sat in the kitchen, staring at Margaret's empty chair, listening to the silence that seemed to echo in her absence. I thought about the years she had poured her love into our family, especially into Kyle, and I wondered how we had gotten here. The next morning, as the pale sunlight crept through the blinds, I found myself staring at her coffee cup still sitting on the counter, faint traces of lipstick clinging stubbornly to the rim. My fingers trembled as I adjusted my black tie for the third time. At 8:30 a.m., I picked up the phone and dialed Kyle's number. 4 rings. Then his voice groggy, distracted. "Yeah, Dad." "The funeral starts at 11:30. I said, forcing my voice to stay steady. In the background, I heard loud music thumping, people laughing, Megan's voice barking about decorations. "Dad, I told you yesterday," Kyle said, clearing his throat. "Megan's birthday party is tonight. We've been planning this for months." My hand tightened on the receiver. "Your mother's funeral is today, Kyle. Today. Once in a lifetime." "Look," he said, his voice growing sharper. "Mom's not coming back, but my wife's birthday only happens once a year. We've got caterers coming, the band's setting up." I swallowed hard. "Your mother raised you for 35 years. "I appreciate that," he interrupted. "But I can't just abandon Megan on her special day. You understand, right?" The line went dead. I sat there for exactly 3 minutes, staring at Margaret's reading glasses beside the phone. The kitchen clock read 8:47 a.m. My wedding ring caught a shard of sunlight streaming through the windows she had cleaned just last week. The funeral program lay on the counter, Kyle's name printed neatly among the pallbearers. I took a pen and scratched it out with slow, deliberate strokes. At the cemetery, heads turned, scanning for Kyle. Patricia, Margaret's sister, leaned toward me, whispering, "Where's Kyle?" I forced a tight smile. "Important commitments," I said, the words tasting bitter in my mouth. 23 people came to honor my wife of 40 years. Her son was not one of them. I stood beside her casket, surrounded by Margaret's garden club friends and our old neighbors. The empty space at my side felt like a canyon. She had always been so proud of him, always telling Mrs. Henderson about his latest promotion, always defending him. "He's just busy with his new life," she'd say, even when he missed her chemo appointments. Young couples need space. The pastor spoke of family bonds and eternal love, but each shovel of dirt that fell onto the polished wood felt like it was bearing more than just Margaret. It was bearing my illusions about the man my son had become. Driving home, my hands clenched the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. The passenger seat, her seat, was painfully empty. I could almost hear her voice insisting we take her little Honda instead of my truck because it's better for the environment. The radio began to play her favorite song. I switched it off. Our street looked the same, neat lawns, freshly painted mailboxes. But without her, it felt like a place I no longer recognized. I pulled into the driveway and let the engine idle for a moment, staring through the windshield at the quiet, familiar outline of the house. My hands rested on the steering wheel, unwilling to let go, as if once I stepped inside, the reality of her absence would hit harder than it had all day. Finally, I turned the key and silenced the car. The crunch of gravel under my shoes sounded too loud in the stillness. At the front door, the key slid into the lock and turned with its familiar soft click, a sound I'd heard thousands of times yet. Today it carried a weight I could barely stand. I stepped inside and hung my keys on the little wooden hook Margaret had installed 20 years ago. She'd insisted on putting it by the door, saying it would save you from losing them in that disaster you call an office. It was such a small, ordinary gesture, but in the silence it felt monumental. No warm humming from the kitchen, no clinking of dishes, no television murmuring a half-watched daytime show. Only the creaks of the house settling 40 years of shared life still here, but stripped of her presence. I loosened my black tie and let it hang limply around my neck as I sank into my armchair. The brown leather one Margaret always said clashed terribly with her beloved floral curtains. She had wanted to redecorate for years, but I'd always been too busy building the business, telling her next year until the years ran out. Now those curtains would never come down. From the mantel, our wedding photo watched me. Margaret at 23, radiant, standing in her grandmother's lace dress. I could still remember the way she looked at me that day, like I was the only man in the world. We'd married right here in Davenport with nothing but our vows and a promise to give each other everything we had. And I had delivered on that promise maybe too well. Memories began to flood in, uninvited but relentless. Kyle's first steps right across this very living room. His little chubby hands reaching for Margaret's arms, her laughter ringing out like music. Birthday parties with handmade streamers and cardboard hats, because store-bought decorations were a luxury we couldn't afford back then. Margaret working double shifts at the diner while I tried to get the construction company off the ground. She never once complained, not when I worked 16-hour days, not when dinner was the same macaroni and cheese 3 nights in a row. She'd simply smile, tuck Kyle into bed between us when he was too little for his own room and whisper, "We're building his future, Alan." Later upstairs, I found her Bible resting on the nightstand, its worn leather cover soft from decades of use. Bookmarks still marked her favorite psalms. As I opened it, a folded piece of paper slipped out and fluttered to the floor. It was her handwriting. "My dearest Alan, please don't let Kyle forget us. We gave him everything we had. I hope that was enough. All my love, M." My hands trembled as I read her careful script. In the closet on the top shelf, I found a small dusty box she had kept hidden away. Inside was a lifetime of love in paper form, Kyle's report cards from kindergarten all the way through college. Every single A+ celebrated, every minor achievement documented. She had written tiny notes in the margins. So proud. Our brilliant boy. But what broke me was the stack of graduation photos. Kyle in his cap and gown, grinning at the camera, diploma in hand. I knew that smile. I had seen it before, bright and confident, but I also knew the price behind it. That degree had been bought with Margaret's overtime hours, with my weekend jobs, with over $200,000 scraped together dollar by dollar. And yet in that smile there was no hint, no acknowledgement of the sacrifices that had made it possible. I pulled out my old calculator, the same one I'd used to balance the books when the construction business was just a one-man operation, and began punching in numbers. The first figure was burned into my memory: the down payment on Kyle's house. $350. That home had been our gift to help him start a family without the burden of debt. Next, his wedding to Megan, $75,000 for the reception hall, the catering, the band she insisted on flying in from Chicago. I could still see Margaret's smile that day, so proud, never letting on how much we'd sacrificed to give them their dream celebration. Then his first car, a brand new sedan, $35,000. I'd suggested a used one, but Kyle had insisted a man's first car should be dependable and make a good impression. Graduate school, another $48,000 for an MBA he swore would open doors. He never finished, never even worked in the field. Said he needed to find himself instead. And then came the string of emergency loans, each one supposedly urgent, covering vacations. Megan's endless shopping sprees, failed business ventures that burned through cash like dry leaves in a fire. Margaret's coffee mug still sat in the dishwasher, a faint ring of lipstick marking its edge. Her romance novel lay open on the nightstand, the bookmark waiting for eyes that would never turn another page. On the kitchen counter, a row of get well cards leaned against the wall, bright with messages from friends and neighbors. People who had cared more about her final months than her own son. The numbers on my calculator kept climbing, almost taunting me with their cold precision. Kyle's total over 15 years, $847,000. Nearly $1 million of our lives handed over freely, not as obligation, but as love, as hope. I thought of my own father, a man carved out of granite, who had given me nothing but the hard-edged expectation to make my own way. Build your own character, he'd say. Maybe he'd been right all along. By now, darkness had settled over the yard. I didn't bother turning on the lights. The house felt different in the dark, smaller, somehow, like it was holding its breath. A car pulled into the driveway. I sat still, listening. The engine idled for a few seconds as if its driver were hesitating. I didn't get up to look. If Kyle wanted to come inside, he knew exactly where to find me. The engine revved, then faded away down the street. At 6:00 a.m., I was at my mahogany desk, the one Margaret used to dust every Sunday morning. File folders lay in precise rows before me, each labeled in my block handwriting: Kyle, education; Kyle, house; Kyle, wedding. My coffee grew cold beside me as I opened the calculator app again. Ready to do the reckoning, Margaret had been too gentle, too forgiving to ever demand. The reflection of my reading glasses caught the glow of the computer screen as I pulled up years of bank records. 15 years of transactions, each one labeled transfer to Kyle or loan. Kyle emergency. The rustle of paper was the only sound in the quiet house, my new reality. I started at the beginning. College tuition, 4 years at $52,000 each. I could remember the weight of every one of those checks as I signed them, Margaret working extra shifts at the diner just so we could cover our own bills while Kyle partied away his nights at Iowa State. Then graduate school, another $48,000 money that was supposed to buy him a future. Instead, he abandoned the program halfway through trading textbooks for train tickets. That European soul-searching trip had cost us $35,000. And as I sat there adding it all up, I realized I wasn't just counting money anymore. I was counting trust chipped away year after year until there was almost nothing left. Just temporary dad until I get established. I can still see him, Kyle, at 25, standing in our living room with Megan by his side, her engagement ring catching the light like a promise neither of them had yet earned. His smile was wide, confident, almost boyish, as if what he was about to ask was simply the natural order of things. We found the perfect place, he'd said, but we're a little short on the down payment. Short turned out to mean $350,000. The house purchase nearly broke us. I had co-signed the mortgage and covered every single penny of that down payment. He'd hugged me then tightly, almost convincingly, and said, "Family helps family. I'll pay you back once the business takes off," he'd promised. What business? He'd been working for me since the day he graduated, drawing a salary he hadn't truly earned while I taught him skills I'd hoped would mean something to him someday. Instead, I began to suspect he saw the business not as a legacy to be earned, but as a wallet with no bottom. As I sorted through the files on my desk, a small spiral-bound notebook slipped out, a notebook I had never seen before. Margaret's handwriting covered every page in her neat, slanted script. I began to read. Anniversary dinner canceled. Needed $5,000 for Kyle's car repair. Postponed my doctor's visit. Kyle's wedding costs higher than expected. Bought generic groceries this month. Sent Kyle money for Megan's birthday. Each line was like a quiet confession of a sacrifice she had never spoken aloud. And then near the back, her final note. We gave Kyle everything. I hope he remembers us kindly. My throat tightened as I closed the notebook. I returned to my calculator. The numbers climbed relentlessly, $840,000, more than $750,000. I thought about my own father, who had sent me into the world with nothing more than a firm handshake and $20 in my pocket. I had built everything I owned from the ground up, and yet Kyle had treated it all as if it were his birthright and inheritance to be spent while we were still alive. I remembered last Christmas standing in the living room as Kyle introduced my company to Megan's relatives. It's a family business, he'd said with a casual pride, as if he had built it brick by brick beside me, instead of walking into a ready-made position with a desk, a paycheck, and no risk. Megan had nodded approvingly, her eyes already calculating future profits from 40 years of my labor. And that was when something inside me shifted. My business mindset began to take over. This wasn't grief anymore. This wasn't about comfort or patience. This was a problem, and problems had solutions. I realized I had been emotional for too long, making excuses for behavior Margaret had quietly worried about for years. I could still hear her voice from the kitchen, low and hesitant after Kyle's latest emergency call. Maybe we're doing too much for him. I looked at her framed photograph on the corner of my desk. Her eyes seemed to be asking me for an answer. You were right to worry, I told her softly. I closed the files, stood up, and felt something harder than grief settle in my chest. It was resolve. The phone rang, jolting me from my thoughts. Kyle's name lit up the caller ID. I let it ring once, twice, 3 times, 4. Then finally I picked up. Hey, Dad, his voice came through, carrying that familiar, cheerful tone, the same tone he always used when he was winding up to ask for something. Hope you're doing okay after yesterday. I noticed almost immediately that he didn't say the word funeral. Not once. He didn't ask how I was coping without Margaret. Didn't mention her name as if ignoring the loss might make it less real. I'm managing, I said evenly, forcing my voice to remain steady, while my eyes stayed locked on the financial documents scattered across my desk. Columns of numbers that told the story of decades of sacrifice. Good, good, he replied quickly, his tone upbeat, already shifting gears. Listen, I'm calling because we need to cover some unexpected costs. In the background, Megan's voice chimed in, bright and insistent. Tell him about the band. Megan's party went amazing. Kyle continued, but we kind of went overboard. You know how it is, you only turn 32 once, right? I could hear the pride in his voice as he painted the picture. We hired this incredible live band, best in the city. Took everyone to that new steakhouse downtown. Got Megan this gorgeous diamond bracelet. She deserves the best you know. The list kept going, each detail twisting deeper. But now the credit card bills are rolling in, and we're looking at about $15,000 in immediate payments. 15,000, I repeated, my mind doing the math without effort. Loan number 47 in 15 years. Yesterday I had buried my wife. Today my son wanted money for a party. So can you just wire it to my account today? He asked casually. Megan's really stressed about the bills, and you know how she gets when she's worried. The moment stretched between us like a pulled wire, tense and dangerous. I glanced at Margaret's framed photograph, her smile frozen in time, then back at the neat rows of figures documenting every dollar we had poured into Kyle. Over the years, money that had cost us more than just savings. It had cost us time, peace, and now respect. No, I said. Silence. Then what do you mean, no? Is there a problem with the bank? I mean, no, Kyle. I won't be giving you any more money. I could hear the cheerful mask slip from his voice, replaced by disbelief. Are you seriously saying no to me right now, after everything we've been through this week? Everything we've been through. As if he'd endured Margaret's funeral instead of throwing a party. You're 35 years old, Kyle. So what does that have to do with helping your son out of a jam? It's not like you can't afford it. In the background, Megan's voice sharpened the edge, unmistakable. Tell him we need that money. We already spent it. I said no. I repeated the words, feeling foreign on my tongue, the first time in my life I'd ever denied him anything. This is unbelievable, he said, his voice turning cold. Mom just died, and you're being petty about money. She'd want you to help us. The manipulation slid off his tongue effortlessly, like a line he'd rehearsed 100 times. How many times had he played this card? How many times had Margaret and I folded because he invoked family loyalty? Your mother wanted you at her funeral, I said quietly. I heard his breathing grow harsher. Fine. Fine. We'll figure this out ourselves. Max out. More cards, borrow from Megan's parents, whatever. But don't expect us to come around much anymore, if this is how you're going to be. The threat hung in the air, heavy and familiar. For 35 years, it had always worked, his presence as a reward for my money, his absence as punishment for my refusal. I understand, I said calmly. What I understand. Take care, Kyle. I hung up before he could respond. The phone sat silent on my desk, no longer a tool for him to pull my strings. For the first time in decades, I had ended a conversation with my son on my terms. I opened my laptop and navigated to his employee file. Tomorrow morning, we'd have a different kind of conversation, one in the office where I was the boss, not the father who'd blurred the line for far too long. If Kyle wanted to treat me like a stranger, I'd oblige him professionally. At 7:30 the next morning, I walked through the glass doors of Foster Construction's lobby 2 full hours before Kyle's usual arrival. His employee photo hung on the management wall, his confident smile framed in a suit I had bought him. Today I studied that image with new eyes. The pride I once saw there had been replaced in my mind with entitlement. In my office, I spread his personnel file across the desk, like evidence prepared for a trial. 8 years of employment records, each page whispering the same truth. Missed deadlines, contractor, complaints, inflated expense reports, projects delayed because Kyle had chosen long lunches over site supervision, and client relationships strained by his casual attitude toward commitments. I realized I had been his safety net in both life and work, shielding him from consequences that would have ended any other employee's career years ago. I had excused it all in the name of family, while Margaret, ever gentle, had urged me to give him more time. But looking at those records now, I knew time was exactly what he had been wasting. At exactly 8:45, I picked up the phone and asked Sarah Mitchell to come to my office. As the company's HR director, she'd be the one to make sure every piece of paperwork was handled to the letter of the law. When she stepped in, her expression held no surprise, only the quiet resolve of someone who had been expecting this moment far longer than I had been ready to face it. I told her my decision in a few clipped, deliberate sentences. She listened without interruption, then gave a single nod. "I'll prepare the termination documents immediately," she said, her voice low but steady. There was no judgment in her tone, just the calm professionalism of a person who'd been quietly gathering evidence, filing reports, and waiting for me to stop protecting my son from the consequences he'd earned. "Security escort," I added after a moment. Her eyes flicked toward mine, confirming that I meant it. "Yes, standard protocol for management terminations." When she left, I closed the office door and turned to the full-length mirror that hung behind it. I stood there for a long moment, staring at the man in the reflection, the grieving husband, the betrayed father, the business owner finally reclaiming his authority. I practiced the words I would use, listening to my own voice in the stillness. The tone had to be precise, firm, professional, without the faintest tremor of personal grief. Kyle would walk into this office as my son, who happened to be an employee. He would leave as an ex-employee who happened to be my son. At 9:30, the elevator doors opened, and Kyle sauntered in 15 minutes late as usual. He was laughing with the receptionist, spinning some story about how he was still recovering from Megan's party. His laughter echoed across the lobby like nothing in the world could touch him. I saw the quick, uneasy glances from a few employees as if they knew something he didn't. He stopped at the coffee machine, stirring in sugar with that careless rhythm that had always irritated me, and poured himself a cup as though the day ahead promised nothing more serious than a meeting or two. I reached for the intercom. "Kyle, please come to my office immediately." "Sure, Dad," his voice floated back, casual, amused. "Just let me grab my coffee." Now, Kyle, that pause, just a heartbeat but enough, told me he'd heard the change in my tone. The easy confidence in his steps seemed to drain away as they grew slower, heavier down the hallway. When he finally opened the door and saw Sarah Mitchell standing beside my desk holding a manila folder, the faintest flicker of doubt crossed his face. His smile wavered. "What's with the formal setup?" he asked, aiming for his usual casual charm, but a thin thread of unease pulled at the edges of his words. I didn't stand. I kept my hands folded on the desk the way a judge might when delivering a verdict. "Kyle, your employment with Foster Construction is terminated effective immediately." For a second, he just stared at me. Then he laughed, but the sound was brittle. "Very funny, Dad. What's this really about?" I slid the documents across the polished desk toward him. "Please review these papers and sign where indicated." He picked them up reluctantly, the pages seeming heavier than paper should feel, as though they carried the weight of every missed deadline, every failed project, every careless mistake. His eyes moved over the legal language and the color drained from his face. "You can't be serious," he said at last, his voice tight. "This is our family business. This decision is based on your work performance and professional conduct," I said evenly. "Your position has been eliminated due to restructuring." His composure cracked just slightly. "This is about yesterday's phone call, isn't it?" The words were laced with pleading now. "Look, I'm sorry about the money thing. We can work this out. Security will escort you to collect your personal items." The words landed like a final verdict. I saw it in Kyle's eyes, the shift from stunned disbelief to raw desperation. He leaned forward, voice trembling, but still trying to sound steady. "Mom wouldn't want this. You know she wouldn't," he said hoarsely, trying to dig into the wound that had never healed, hoping to summon the guilt that had always bent me to his will in the past. But I wasn't going to be pulled into that spiral again. My hand moved calm but resolute, pressing the security button. "This is a business decision, not a personal one." Each word fell like a door shutting in his face. Mike Thompson appeared in the doorway, composed and professional, though his eyes betrayed a flicker of sympathy. Kyle realized in that moment this wasn't a bluff. His face flushed crimson, a mix of rage and humiliation, as a few employees lingered in the hallway watching the boss's son being escorted out like a disgraced employee. "Dad, please." His voice cracked as he gathered the few things that mattered, a battered coffee mug and a framed photo of Megan. "Think about what this means," he said, locking eyes with me for the first time. "I have," I replied. Through my office window, I watched him walk to the parking lot, his footsteps, heavy shoulders trembling. Whether from grief or fury, I couldn't tell. When he turned back for one final glance at the building, I turned away. Sarah returned, setting the signed paperwork on my desk. "All access codes have been changed. His computer access is terminated." Her tone was soft but decisive. I reached up and took Kyle's photo down from the management wall, placing it face down in my desk drawer. The empty spot looked cleaner somehow. A soft knock came at the door. "Mr. Foster, someone is here to see you without an appointment." The sharp click of designer heels echoed through the marble-floored lobby, each step fast and forceful, slicing through the air. Megan Foster stormed in without waiting for permission, her perfectly styled hair slightly wind-tossed but her eyes ablaze. Kyle trailed behind her, stripped of all the confidence he'd had just an hour ago, looking smaller, weaker. "How dare you humiliate Kyle like this?" Megan's voice rang out, finger jabbing at me like an accusation carved in steel. I stayed seated, letting her performance play out. Kyle slid between us, trying to shield both sides from the inevitable collision. "Megan, let me handle this," he murmured. She ignored him completely. "We have bills to pay, a lifestyle to maintain. This family business belongs to Kyle, too." "This is a private workplace," I said evenly, my voice calm, my face unreadable. "You need to leave." Her face darkened. "We deserve severance pay, at least 6 months. Kyle's worked here for 8 years. You owe us," Kyle tried to mediate. "Dad, please, can we discuss this privately?" But Megan cut him off. "No, he needs to hear this. I know about wrongful termination laws." "Kyle was an at-will employee," I replied flatly. "No severance is required by law or contract." That was when Megan's tone shifted. The anger in her voice turned sharp and deliberate, like a blade. "Margaret would be ashamed of how you're treating her son. You're having some kind of breakdown, aren't you? Just a bitter old man taking out your grief on us." Kyle's face went pale. "Megan, please don't say that." My jaw tightened, but I held my composure. I had expected this from her, indignation as a mask for manipulation. Kyle, now visibly desperate, tried one last time. "Dad, I know I messed up with the funeral. I am sorry, but destroying my career won't bring Mom back. Think about what this means for our family, for future grandchildren." The words hung in the air like smoke curling from the embers of a dying fire, clinging to the walls, refusing to vanish. I studied the man in front of me, the one who shared my bloodline, but not my values, my name, but not my integrity. Somewhere along the way, the bridge between father and son had burned to ash, and all that remained were strangers staring at each other across a desk. "What family?" I asked quietly, my voice stripped of warmth. Megan pounced on the silence, her fury sharpening into something colder, more calculated. "Then we'll sue," she spat. "For our share of Margaret's estate, Kyle is entitled to half of everything. We know about the life insurance policy." Her words were a loaded gun aimed directly at me, but the truth was my shield. "Margaret left everything to me," I replied evenly. The color drained from her face, the sudden stillness betraying her shock. That's impossible." "It's fact," I said simply. But Megan was nothing if not relentless. Her moment of hesitation evaporated, replaced by a sneer. "We're consulting a lawyer." I pressed the security button under my desk as her voice began climbing into dangerous territory. Mike Thompson appeared in the doorway, within seconds flanked by another guard. Their quiet, professional presence filled the room with authority. The hallway outside had grown crowded, curious employees drawn by the commotion. Heads peeked around corners. The tension in the air was thick enough to taste. "I'm not leaving," Megan's scream ricocheted off the walls. "This is theft. This is abuse." Her resistance was loud, theatrical, but ultimately futile. Security moved in their hands, firm yet controlled, guiding her toward the exit. She fought the whole way, her heels striking the polished floor in angry staccato. The entire office bore witness as she was escorted through the lobby, her threats and accusations echoing behind her, like the tail end of a storm. Kyle stood frozen, his humiliation deepening with every step his wife took toward the door. The son I once knew might have tried to stop her. This man simply watched, jaw-clenched, face pale. When the last echo of Megan's voice faded into the distance, the silence between us grew heavy. Kyle's eyes flickered with something almost human desperation, maybe as he leaned forward. His voice dropped to a whisper, meant to cut straight to my core. "I'm all the family you have left." The words were a scalpel meant to slice open old wounds. But instead of breaking me, they crystallized the truth I'd been dancing around for years. I studied him, this stranger who had worn my son's face for 35 years, and finally said what needed to be said. "No, you're just someone who used to be my son." Kyle's face crumbled. For a brief, flickering instant, I saw the boy who used to sprint into my arms after school, smelling of grass and sunshine. Then it was gone, replaced by the entitled, resentful man he'd become. He left without another word. Turning to my employees, who were still quietly gathered nearby, I spoke with the calm authority they needed to hear. "This is a personal matter," I said. "It will not affect business operations." Most of them nodded. They had seen Kyle's incompetence firsthand for years. No explanation was truly necessary. I turned to security. "Please ensure Mrs. Foster is never allowed in this building again." When the door closed behind them, I finally let myself feel it, the faint tremor in my hands, the lingering sting in my chest. The hardest part was over. My gaze fell on Margaret's photo, her smile frozen in time. "I hope you understand," I murmured. I opened my computer and began typing. "Estate planning attorneys in Davenport." It was time to accelerate the next phase. Robert Chen's name stood out, meticulous, discreet, and as unshakable as they came. I called and secured an appointment for that very afternoon. Before shutting down my calendar, my eyes landed on a small reminder: Kyle's birthday marked for next month. My finger hovered for only a second before I pressed delete. Permanently. At 2:30 p.m., I stepped into the sleek, glass-lined reception of Chen & Associates, Davenport's most prestigious law firm. The air smelled faintly of leather and ambition. I carried my black briefcase, its contents heavy with finality: Margaret's will, the life insurance policy, and financial records that would reshape the future of this family forever. The receptionist looked up the moment I stepped through the glass doors, her eyes lighting with immediate recognition. She didn't ask for my name or appointment time, just stood and gestured for me to follow. Her heels clicked briskly on the marble floor as she led me past a row of minimalist glass-walled offices to the farthest corner suite. Robert Chen's office was everything you'd expect from one of Davenport's most respected attorneys: floor-to-ceiling windows, spilling warm afternoon sunlight across a fortress of mahogany walls lined with rows of meticulously arranged law books and neatly stacked case files, hinting at the high-stakes matters handled within these walls. The faint scent of polished wood and fresh paper hung in the air. Robert rose from behind his desk the moment I entered, his expression a rare mix of professional composure and personal concern. We had known each other for over 2 decades. This was the man who had drawn up Margaret's will, incorporated my business, and guided me through countless legal storms with quiet discretion. "How are you holding up, Alan?" His voice was low-weighted with genuine sympathy. I shook my head at his offer of coffee and lowered myself into the deep leather chair opposite him. It creaked softly under my weight, the sound oddly intimate in the quiet office. "I need to make some changes to my estate planning." Robert's brow furrowed slightly, then smoothed as his instincts took over. His voice shifted into its familiar measured cadence. "Of course, updating beneficiaries after Margaret's passing is standard procedure." "No." My tone was firm enough to slice through the air. I set my briefcase on the desk, unbuckled the straps, and drew out the documents I had carried like a weapon. "I'm removing Kyle entirely." The words landed with the weight of a verdict. For a moment, Robert simply stared, his professional mask slipping as the full meaning sank in. "Alan," he began, slowly leaning back in his chair, "I need to understand what's driving this decision." I told him plainly, without theatrics. Kyle's absence at his mother's funeral, his exact words about choosing Megan's birthday party over honoring the woman who raised him. As I spoke, Robert's face grew darker, his jaw tightening with each detail. When I finished, the silence in the room was thick. Robert didn't need me to elaborate. As Margaret's friend and as our family's attorney, he understood the magnitude of what Kyle had done. "I want to create a completely new will," I said finally. My voice was steady, my decision ironclad. "The primary beneficiary will be the Margaret Foster Memorial Foundation." Robert straightened his eyes, sharpening with focus. "Alan, I'm obligated to ensure you're thinking clearly about this. This is significant. I've never been more certain of anything in my life." I leaned forward, unfolding the vision I'd carried quietly for weeks, perhaps months, without admitting it to myself. The foundation would fund scholarships for underprivileged children, advance cancer research, and support the causes Margaret had championed throughout her life. It would be her legacy untarnished by the greed or negligence of those who had failed her in life. "Kyle," I said with deliberate clarity, "is to be explicitly excluded along with any future descendants." Robert didn't interrupt. He just listened, his admiration evident in the way his eyes softened as I spoke. When I shifted to the practicalities, transferring company assets into an irrevocable trust, protecting them from any potential lawsuits, his nod was slow but approving. "You'll retain full control during your lifetime," he confirmed, "and upon your passing, the foundation assumes ownership of everything." "That's exactly what I want," I said. My voice was final, but inside I felt something new, not grief, not even anger. Just the quiet certainty of a man taking the last step to close a door that should have been shut long ago. Robert's pen moved methodically across the yellow legal pad, the quiet scratch of ink filling the space between us. "We'll need to change all insurance beneficiaries as well." He noted, his tone steady but edged with the awareness of the scale of what I was doing. He glanced up briefly, meeting my eyes. "This is extremely thorough planning, Alan." I gave a single nod. Thorough was the point. There could be no gaps, no loose ends. The family home, the place where Margaret's laughter once warmed every corner, would be sold. Every cent of the proceeds would flow into the foundation. Her jewelry, each piece holding a story, would be auctioned for charity. All except one. "Margaret's wedding ring," I said quietly, my hand unconsciously brushing my own. "That will be buried with me when my time comes." Robert's next question was measured, almost careful. "And Kyle's childhood belongings donated," I answered without hesitation. "I'm systematically removing Kyle from my life." He leaned back, studying me with the dual lens of a friend and a lawyer. It was his duty to question my mental state, to ensure I understood the weight of every choice I was making. But as I laid out my reasoning with calm precision, each answer grounded in logic, I saw the shift in his eyes from concern to professional respect. The formal signing was staged in Robert's conference room with 2 legal witnesses from his firm. Their presence was silent, procedural. My hand moved across page after page, my signature crisp and unshaking, despite the enormity of each decision. Robert's voice was low but firm when he confirmed, "These documents take effect immediately." It was done. Kyle was now completely disinherited. "I want Kyle to receive formal notice of this change," I said. My voice carried no anger, only finality. Robert's efficiency kicked into high gear. Additional protections followed in quick succession. Power of attorney revoked. Medical directives rewritten to exclude Kyle from any role in my healthcare decisions. A living will, precise in its instructions, for my care. Robert recorded every detail of my mental competency, ensuring there would be no grounds for challenge. Tomorrow I would visit each bank personally, removing Kyle as beneficiary from every account, every retirement fund, every investment portfolio. "If you'd like," Robert offered, "I can coordinate directly with the financial institutions to streamline the process." I agreed, but what surprised me was the sense of peace seeping in, where only cold determination had lived for days. The foundation's planning was no longer just paperwork, it was becoming a living blueprint for Margaret's legacy. I nominated Robert as a trustee, mapped out the board structure, and began discussing the first scholarship recipients. "Margaret would be proud of this," Robert said as we wrapped up. "She always believed in education and in helping others." For the first time since Margaret's funeral, I felt something close to relief. Not triumph, not vengeance, just justice. When we shook hands outside his office, the air felt lighter. My phone buzzed in my pocket, 3 missed calls from Kyle. The first cracks of realization were setting in. I didn't bother listening to the voicemails. They joined the trash folder without a second thought. The Davenport Country Club was my next stop. Its grand lobby greeted me with its usual understated opulence: mahogany wall panels, crystal chandeliers catching the afternoon light, and oil portraits of founders who stared down from their frames with the smug serenity of old money. I stepped forward ready for the next phase. As treasurer of the Davenport Country Club's monthly board meetings, I had walked these halls for 15 years. Every polished tile, every burnished brass fixture, every faint scent of leather from the club chairs carried the weight of history and tradition. This was my second home, a place where business was conducted with decorum, reputations were made, and sometimes unmade. The mahogany-paneled conference room glowed in the afternoon light. 12 board members sat in their usual seats around the long, gleaming table, murmuring over club budgets and maintenance reports. The scent of fresh coffee from silver carafes mingled with the faint polish of the leather-bound chairs. From across the room came the low hum of side conversations, a subtle dance of small-town politics and social positioning. William Hayes, our board president, approached with the dignified stride of a man who'd been born into these walls. His expression carried genuine sympathy. "Alan," he said warmly, "the memorial service was beautiful." Margaret would have been pleased. I met his gaze with a measured smile. "Thank you, William, and thank you for the flowers. They meant a great deal." Before the moment could settle, Patricia Morton appeared, Margaret's sister, a longtime member, her pearls catching the light as she joined us. Her voice was soft but edged with curiosity. "I kept looking for Kyle during the service," she said. "Where was he, ah?" The question I had been expecting. For a heartbeat, I considered offering the easy answer, a vague excuse, something to smooth over the awkwardness. But Margaret deserved better than diplomacy. She deserved the truth. "Kyle," I said evenly, chose not to attend his mother's funeral. A stillness gripped the room. Conversations faltered. Coffee cups paused midair. Patricia's face went pale. "What do you mean?" Chose not to. I gave them his exact words without embellishment. "Megan's birthday party is more important." The reaction was instant and unfiltered. William's jaw tightened. Patricia's lips trembled. Around the table, faces hardened in visible disgust, the kind reserved for moral failings that money and status could not excuse. I saw in their eyes the silent verdict: Kyle had broken the unspoken code of family and respect that defined Davenport society. In the hallway beyond the open door, Nancy Hayes, William's wife, had been lingering half-hidden. She heard enough. Within minutes, she was on the phone. By the time I left the club, the story had already traveled across the ladies' bridge tables. By dinner, it had reached the city's most exclusive cocktail hours. And by morning, it would be common knowledge among Davenport's social elite. I went home that evening, unaware of the storm I had set in motion. The first gust struck Megan the very next morning. At her yoga class in the city's most exclusive studio, the instructor paused mid-session, her tone icily polite. "I think we prefer members who share our family values," she said before asking Megan to gather her things. That same afternoon, Kyle received a call from the country club. His lunch reservation had been rescinded, the voice on the other end, apologetic but firm. Romano's, their favorite upscale Italian spot, suddenly had no availability for their regular table. By Friday, the pattern was undeniable. On Saturday morning, the humiliation turned public. At the golf course, his foursome arrived late, offered awkward excuses, and left early. The pro shop manager, avoiding Kyle's eyes, suggested perhaps he might be more comfortable playing elsewhere. He walked back to his car alone, the truth dawning on him like a slow, cruel sunrise everyone knew. Megan's world began shrinking too. At Bergdorf's, the high-end boutique where she'd been treated like royalty for years, the sales staff suddenly found themselves too busy to assist her. Her credit application, usually processed within minutes, was delayed without explanation. The store manager, all smiles, but no warmth, suggested she might prefer shopping elsewhere. And then came the professional fallout. Kyle's job interviews evaporated one by one, politely canceled or simply never confirmed. Business contacts who had once called weekly went silent. His much-anticipated networking lunch at the Chamber of Commerce turned awkward within minutes, the conversation polite but clipped. He could see it in their eyes they'd heard the story before he walked through the door. In a matter of days, Kyle and Megan had been quietly exiled from the very social circles they had once relied on to feel important. Their fall was not loud or dramatic, but it was absolute. The breaking point came one Thursday afternoon at Elite Salon, the kind of place where Megan had been pampered for years, her hair appointments booked months in advance. That day, however, her regular stylist called her to the front desk mid-session, a pained but rehearsed smile on her face. "I'm afraid we'll need to cancel all future appointments," the receptionist said quietly. The hum of hair dryers and chatter suddenly felt louder. Megan froze, confusion flashing across her features. Then from two chairs over, she caught the unmistakable drift of conversation. Two women leaning toward each other, voices lowered, but not low enough. "Heartless. Didn't even show up to his own mother's funeral." The words hit her like glass shattering in her chest. She abandoned the chair, hair half finished, and fled the salon with tears cutting streaks down her cheeks. The humiliation didn't stop there. By Sunday, Davenport's most widely read society column, penned by a woman who never missed an opportunity to pass judgment, casually mentioned the conspicuous absence of certain family members at Margaret Foster's memorial. It didn't name Kyle outright, but it didn't need to. Everyone knew. At church, the warm handshakes and polite smiles evaporated. Parishioners who had once asked after their vacations now met them with tight-lipped nods or turned away entirely. At public events, former friends suddenly found urgent reasons to be elsewhere. Conversation stopped when Kyle or Megan approached. Kyle, desperate to salvage what was left of their reputation, tried to explain. He told anyone who would listen that I had exaggerated, that the whole thing had been blown out of proportion, but his words slid off the wall of disbelief like water on stone. Davenport was small, proud, and bound by its own code, and its people had already passed judgment. Megan, unable to endure the constant cold shoulders and whispered gossip, finally broke. One night she confronted Kyle in their kitchen, her voice trembling with rage. "This is destroying us, Kyle. Do something. Fix it. I don't know how," he admitted, voice small. Her eyes hardened. "Then I'll leave if you don't. I heard about their unraveling not from them, but through the steady stream of acquaintances who relished keeping me informed. And I won't pretend there wasn't satisfaction in knowing justice was taking shape without me lifting a finger." Davenport valued loyalty to family, respect for the dead, and the decency that bound a community together. Kyle had trampled all three, and now the community was honoring Margaret by closing its doors to those who disrespected her. The next blow wasn't social, it was financial. My phone rang during breakfast, the smell of fresh coffee curling through the kitchen. On the other end was David Harrison, the manager at First National Bank. His tone was careful, tinged with the formality of a man about to deliver bad news. "Mr. Foster, Kyle and Megan's mortgage payment is now 30 days overdue. As you know, you're still the guarantor on their loan." I set down my fork, letting the weight of the moment settle. "I'd like to schedule a meeting tomorrow morning," I replied evenly, "to discuss changes to my guarantees. If social exile had begun to weaken them, financial pressure would finish the job." At precisely 9:00 a.m. The next morning, I stepped through the marble lobby of First National Bank. Oil portraits of the founding families watched from the walls, their gazes steady as if approving of the standards they had built: hard work, integrity, family honor. David's corner office overlooked the Mississippi River, where barges moved slow and steady, carrying the goods that had fueled Davenport's prosperity for generations. But this morning, David's steady demeanor was gone. He shuffled nervously behind his desk, spreading out the papers: mortgage statements, loan agreements, and my signed guarantees, the documented record of 8 years of financial dependency. "Alan, thank you for coming in on such short notice." He began, avoiding my eyes. "Kyle's mortgage is now 60 days delinquent. The amount due is $18,400. I folded my hands neatly in my lap. "I understand you're expecting me to cover it." "Well, yes," David admitted, "as you've done for the past 3 months." His assumption hung in the air like smoke before a fire. I let it linger just long enough before answering. "I'm withdrawing my guarantee, effective immediately." David's face went pale. I don't understand. You've guaranteed this loan for 8 years. From my briefcase, I withdrew a folder prepared by Robert Chen's office. You'll find everything in order. 30 days notice, exactly as the law requires. David's hands trembled as he called the bank's legal department, his voice low and urgent. I simply sat back, watching the traffic move across the bridge outside his window. In that moment, I knew the final pillar of Kyle's comfortable life had just been removed, and that there would be no rebuilding it. Margaret and I had walked those same neighborhood streets countless times hand in hand, sharing dream secrets and the quiet comfort of a life built together. Now sitting in David Harrison's office, the faint echo of those memories wrapped around me like a bittersweet cloak. His voice was steady but heavy with defeat as it came through the speakerphone, Robert Chen, my lawyer, confirming what David had already dreaded. "Yes, David," Robert said with clinical precision. "Mr. Foster's withdrawal is fully compliant with both the contract and the law." The finality in his tone left no room for negotiation. David swallowed his atoms, apple bobbing in the sunlight streaming through the tall windows. This, this means we'll have to begin foreclosure proceedings," he admitted, voice faltering. "I understand," I replied, my tone smooth as glass. "Please, expedite the process." Across town, Kyle was already choking on the dust of consequences. It was his 10th job interview in just 2 weeks, and the ritual had become painfully predictable. The moment he walked in, he could see it in their eyes, recognition, judgment, the unspoken whisper of, "He's the one." He tried the same polished line voice, rehearsed to feign ambition. "I'm simply seeking new challenges." But the words landed on ears that had already been poisoned by the truth of his absence at his mother's funeral. "Thank you for your time, Mr. Foster. We'll be in touch," the interviewer said politely, but with the finality of a slammed door. Outside, Kyle trudged toward his aging Toyota, a far cry from the sleek BMW that had been repossessed just a month earlier. The keys in his hand felt heavier than the car itself. Meanwhile, Megan was discovering her own fresh humiliation. At Nordstrom, her platinum card, a symbol of status she wore like a crown, was declined over something as small as a tube of mascara meant to replace the one her tears had ruined. "There must be some mistake," she told a sales associate, her voice sharp with indignation but tinged with panic. The call to the credit card company stripped away her last illusion. "Your co-signer has withdrawn his guarantee, Mrs. Foster. The account is suspended pending full payment of the balance." The eyes of other shoppers burned into her as she argued in a voice that shook not from anger, but from the dawning realization that the safety nets were gone. All of them. By the time they returned home, the house was already surrendering to the collapse. The electricity was cut off, no hum of the refrigerator, no glow of light bulbs, just the cold notice from the utility company, unpaid bills totaling $1.247. Kyle's attempt to negotiate with the payment department collapsed when they discovered the final blow: his employment had been terminated. That night, their first in the darkness was lit only by candles and thick with silence. Megan paced the living room like a caged animal, the sharp click-click of her designer heels against hardwood, punctuating every accusation. "You've destroyed us," she hissed, eyes wild. Kyle tried weakly to shift the blame onto me, painting me as vindictive, but Megan's rage drowned him out. "Fix this, or I'm gone." Desperation drove him to apply for credit, but every request came back with the same cold rejection: denied. Without a job, his debt-to-income ratio was a death sentence. Megan's cards were already maxed. For the first time, they spoke the word bankruptcy without irony, without pretending it was for tax purposes. It was fear now raw and real. The garage sale was a parade of defeat. Wedding gifts worth hundreds went for $20. Crystal china and silver passed into strangers' hands without a second glance. Megan stood over her jewelry case, watching each piece vanish for pennies on the dollar, her face carved with disbelief. Kyle sold his prized golf clubs to a teenager who could barely lift the bag. The BMW's repossession was the grand finale: broad daylight, the tow truck blocking half the street, while neighbors peeked through blinds whispering. The repo man waited impatiently as Kyle fumbled to gather his personal belongings. Megan screamed at him, her voice breaking, as if fury could stop the winch from tightening. I happened to drive past that evening. Their driveway, once a place of polished cars and manicured pride, was now littered with boxes and broken illusions. I didn't slow down. I didn't need to. This wasn't cruelty. This was consequence. Margaret had always believed that life's truest lessons came from consequences, not lectures. "Every action carries its weight," she would say, her voice calm but unyielding. Now, standing on the far side of the battlefield, I could see that Kyle was finally painfully absorbing the truth she'd preached for decades. The call came on a gray Tuesday morning. His voice was thin, stripped of its usual arrogance, the tone of a man cornered. "Dad, I need to see you." face to face. There's something I have to say. There was a time when such a request would have sparked warmth in my chest. A time when I'd have dropped everything to be there for him. But those days were long gone. Still, I agreed. Morrison Park, tomorrow afternoon. The park was no random choice. It was the same place I had jogged alongside a wobbling 8-year-old Kyle, my hand steadying the back of his bicycle seat until he found his balance and pedaled away laughing in triumph. That was before calculation replaced trust in his eyes, before he learned to see me as a resource, not a father. After hanging up, I found myself looking at that moment frozen in time, a framed photo of Kyle gap-toothed and grinning, riding under a blue sky. My hand lingered on the frame for a moment before I turned it face down on the desk. 6 months after my decisive meeting at the bank, the final act played out on the courthouse steps. The county foreclosure auction was a strangely cold affair for something so personal. I sat in my black sedan across the street, an observer cloaked in anonymity, while the crowd gathered in loose clusters. Real estate investors with legal pads. Curious locals. And there, apart from everyone else, Kyle and Megan, two figures marked by the hollow slump of defeat. The county auctioneer read the property's legal description with the bored precision of a man who had done this hundreds of times. Opening bid is $280,000 for the property located at 1247 Maple Avenue. Through my binoculars, I caught the flash of sunlight on Megan's tear-streaked cheeks. Her designer sunglasses couldn't hide the way her mouth trembled. Kyle scanned the crowd like a drowning man looking for a lifeline. A woman in a sharp navy suit raised her hand. She was unknown to most in attendance, but not to me. Kyle leaned toward Megan, whispering frantically. The bids climbed $295, $302,000, $350,000. Only two bidders remained, the woman in navy and a local contractor. That's when Robert Chen, my attorney, appeared at the edge of the crowd. He gave the woman in navy a single, almost imperceptible nod. I watched the moment Kyle's suspicion solidified into certainty. "That's Dad's lawyer," he hissed to Megan, the words sharp enough to cut through the murmur of the crowd. Her reaction was pure disbelief. He wouldn't. He couldn't. But I could. And I had. When Kyle tried to push toward the bidder, a courthouse security guard stepped between them. The auctioneer's chant quickened. 317,000. Going once. Going twice. Sold. The gavel fell. Kyle's knees buckled. Megan's voice cracked into a scream that bounced off the courthouse walls. "This is our home." I stepped out of the sedan and crossed the street at an unhurried pace. The moment he saw me, the shape of the last 6 months became painfully clear to him. The precision timing of the guarantee withdrawal. The deliberate chain reaction of debt, the exact bid designed to wipe the mortgage clean without leaving them a cent. The woman in navy, Sarah Mitchell, my secretary of 15 years, smiled faintly as she signed the papers on behalf of Mitchell Holdings LLC, a company I'd formed quietly in the background. Kyle staggered toward me, his voice raw. "How could you do this to us?" "I didn't do anything," I said evenly. "The bank did." He made a final desperate appeal, mentioning Margaret's garden, the one she had tended every spring, her favorite roses, now probably wilting in neglect. "Margaret loved that house," he said, voice breaking. My gaze stayed cold, my words colder. Margaret loved integrity more. Margaret wasn't here to witness what her son had become. Maybe that was a blessing. Megan's last stand came like a cornered animal, striking out a wild clawing lunge paired with shrill accusations of elder abuse and claims that I was mentally incompetent. Her voice cracked, but not from grief, from rage and humiliation. Robert Chen, ever the meticulous attorney, documented every word, every violent gesture. The courthouse security moved with clinical efficiency, escorting her away as she kicked against their grip. I didn't stop them. The scene was perfect, an unfiltered display of their true character, captured in real time. 2 weeks later, the moving truck sat in their driveway, comically small for the empire of possessions they once flaunted. It looked less like a relocation and more like a hearse. Megan stuffed clothes into suitcases with the fury of someone packing for escape rather than travel. Kyle moved slower, more deliberate, carefully wrapping Margaret's crystal vase, the last gift she had ever given him, his hands trembling as if he feared it would shatter under the weight of memory. Former neighbors stood at a safe distance watching. No one offered help. No one waved. The social exile was complete. That evening, Megan delivered her final verdict. I can't live like this anymore. Her voice was flat, almost bored, as she confessed she'd been speaking to her ex-boyfriend again. It wasn't just a slip, it was a knife meant to cut deep. I married into a wealthy family, not this. But it was her last words that pierced the deepest. Your father was right about us. Kyle didn't argue. He simply absorbed the blow, shoulders sagging under a weight that had nothing to do with furniture or boxes. That night alone in the now empty house, he wandered through each room like a ghost haunting his own life. The kitchen smelled faintly of Margaret's old lemon cleaner, and in the back of a drawer he found her handwriting, a folded note in her delicate script. Kyle, remember we love you. For the first time in years, real tears came. Not angry tears, not self-pity, but the raw, unfiltered grief of realizing too late what truly mattered. When Sarah Mitchell placed the house keys into my palm the next morning, I felt the quiet click of resolution. The plan was already in motion: gut the place, renovate it, and donate it to a family who deserved a fresh start. Margaret would have approved. She always believed in justice, the kind that didn't need to raise its voice. A week later, my phone rang. Caller ID lit up with Kyle's name. He was calling from a payphone outside a rundown motel, his cell service long since cut off. I let it go to voicemail. The final conversation could wait until I was ready. 3 months after losing the house, Kyle showed up unannounced. It was 7:30 on a cold November night. From my seat in the living room, I watched him stand on the porch, finger hovering over the doorbell for nearly a full minute, as if pressing it required courage he no longer possessed. When I finally opened the door, I did not step aside to let him in. The sight of him startled me. Unshaven hair, unkempt, wearing a wrinkled shirt and jeans that hung loose from rapid weight loss. He looked as if he'd aged 5 years and half a one. The proud, polished son I once knew was gone. Dad. I know I messed up. Bad. His voice trembled as he launched into a carefully rehearsed confession. He painted the picture of his new life: a studio apartment above a laundromat, the stench of detergent and steam, his constant companions, a minimum-wage job pumping gas. And then the dagger Megan had left him for her ex-boyfriend, a man who owned a chain of restaurants. I've learned my lesson, he insisted. I know what really matters now. But then the pivot came, the shift from humility to manipulation. You must get lonely in this big house. I could be the son Mom always wanted me to be. I saw it for what it was, the same old tactics, the same calculated charm. When was your mother's birthday, I asked. He froze. June 15th. Wrong. And her favorite flower, roses, wrong again. Margaret had loved daisies. He had never truly known her. The mask slipped. Frustration crept into his tone. This is ridiculous. Just tell me what you want me to say. And finally the truth emerged. Okay, fine. Yes, I need help. Eviction notices, promises to pay me back once I get back on my feet, appeals to my wealth, to my sense of family. He tried them all. His last play was to invoke Margaret. Mom would be heartbroken to see us like this. She always believed in second chances. I miss her too, Dad. We both loved her. I didn't respond immediately, because in that moment I realized love wasn't what had brought him here. Survival was, and Margaret would have seen it too. For a fleeting moment I almost wavered. Margaret's gentle voice seemed to echo in the corners of my mind, her kindness like a warm hand resting on my shoulder. For years, she had been the bridge between Kyle and me, the one who believed there was still something worth saving. But then the memory darkened, replaced by the truth she had confessed to me in hushed tones late at night. This was exactly the moment she had feared. You want to know what your mother really thought? I asked, my voice low but steady. I turned to walk to the bedroom and opened the top drawer of her nightstand. Beneath a neatly folded handkerchief and a pair of reading glasses was the small leather-bound journal Margaret had kept hidden. My fingers lingered on its worn cover for a moment before I carried it back to the doorway where Kyle stood. Flipping to the final pages, I read her own words aloud, each syllable like a blade slicing through the air. I'm worried Kyle only loves our money. What if we've raised a child who can't love at all? The shock in his face was immediate, his mouth open, but no sound emerging. His silence told me everything. Margaret died knowing exactly what you had become, I said evenly, my eyes locked on his. She changed her will before the end. She left you nothing, because she knew you'd waste it. The mask he wore for months, pleading son, humbled man, shattered instantly. The bitterness rushed in like a tide. His voice rose laced with venom, threatening to contest the will, to drag me into court to claim I was senile and unfit to manage my affairs. It was Margaret's journal that had cut deepest, stripping away any pretense. And then came his final dagger. I hope you die alone in this house. Instead of pain, I felt an unexpected clarity, almost relief. I stepped back without another word and closed the door quietly, sealing him and his poison on the other side. His pounding shook the wood for several long minutes, but I didn't answer. Instead, I walked to the kitchen. The sound of the kettle filled the silence. I made myself a cup of tea and sat at the table as if nothing had happened. When the muffled roar of his car finally faded down the street, I carried my tea to Margaret's favorite chair in the living room. Her journal rested in my lap. I held it as if I were holding her hand again. Looking at our wedding photo on the mantel, I whispered, "It's finished, my love." 1 year later, on a bright May morning, I walked the quiet paths of Riverside Cemetery. The sun filtered gently through the old oak trees, casting shifting patterns of light on the grass. Birds sang above, and the air carried the fresh scent of spring flowers. In my hands, a bouquet of daisies, Margaret's favorite. I knelt at her grave, the polished granite cool beneath my fingertips. As I arranged the fresh blooms, I spoke to her softly, telling her everything she'd missed. The Margaret Foster Memorial Foundation was thriving. 20 scholarships had been awarded to deserving students. $200,000 donated to cancer research in her name. And this summer, on her birthday, the new community center would be dedicated in her honor. Then, almost as an afterthought, I added Kyle works at Sam's gas station on Route 6 now. His divorce is final. Megan remarried a restaurant owner. He's alone. There was no gloating in my tone, no satisfaction in the words, just fact. Justice had been done, and that was enough. As I left the cemetery, I stopped at the Morning Glory Diner for breakfast. The bell above the door jingled, and I stepped inside. Behind the counter in a stained uniform was Kyle. Our eyes met across the room. I saw the flash of recognition followed by the heavy drop of shame in his expression. Without breaking eye contact, I took a seat and ordered coffee from him. My voice calm, my tone polite, treating him exactly as I would any other service worker. In that moment, the balance was complete. "How are you doing?" Dad Kyle's voice was softer than I'd ever heard it, carrying a weight I'd never expected from him. It wasn't the slick charm or defensive tone he'd used in the past. This time there was something else. Humility. "I'm well," I replied simply. He nodded slowly, eyes down. "I know. Sorry isn't enough," he murmured almost to himself. "No," I said, my tone measured. "It isn't." His head lifted slightly as if my words landed exactly where they were meant to. Then, to my surprise, he added, "I understand now what I lost. It was never about the money, was it? You wanted me to love you, not your wallet." For the first time since Margaret's funeral, I saw his eyes glisten with tears that didn't feel staged or manipulative. They weren't crocodile tears. They were the kind that come from finally recognizing the truth you've been running from for years. "Your mother? She won that one too," he said, voice trembling. I exhaled, steady and sure. "I did what I had to do. Margaret would have approved. I have no regrets about any of it." He swallowed hard, nodding. "I know, I deserved all of it." "Yes," I said without hesitation. "You did." After a long silence, he asked, "Is there any way back?" I looked him straight in the eye. "I don't know. Maybe. But you'd have to prove you've really changed. Not with words. Words are easy. Show me through your actions." I told him about my life now, how my weeks were filled with volunteer work at the community center, the friendships I'd built with people who valued kindness over wealth, and the warmth of Sunday dinners with the Johnson family, their daughter Emily, a bright-eyed young woman who'd been one of our scholarship recipients. I told him about Grace, the kind widow I'd met at church, how she'd brought laughter back into my days, the kind of laughter that comes from mutual respect, not obligation. And I told him about Sarah Patterson, our very first scholarship awardee. Visiting her at nursing school filled me with a pride I hadn't known in years. She'd written a letter to Margaret's memory thanking her for making her dreams possible. That letter now lived on the Foundation's website, a testament to the way Margaret's influence still shaped lives. Driving home one afternoon, I passed Kyle's old house. The Ramirez family had made it their own, a warm, welcoming place, brimming with life. Mr. Ramirez was in the garden tending the very flower beds Margaret used to care for. He waved as I slowed the car, his smile broad and genuine. Children's laughter spilled from the backyard, echoing in the same space where Kyle once played as a boy. That house, it no longer carried the shadow of greed or bitterness. Instead, it was alive with love and gratitude. Everything Margaret had valued was alive there. That evening, I prepared dinner in the kitchen I once shared with her. I set one place at the table, but this time without the hollow ache of loneliness. My phone rang, Grace calling to talk about our weekend plans. I smiled as I answered, realizing it was the first genuine smile I'd worn since Margaret's passing. Later, as the sun dipped low, I stood in the garden, pruning Margaret's rose bushes. The air was golden warm against my skin. In that moment, I felt the quiet, profound peace of a man who had fought for justice and won. I knew with absolute certainty that I had honored my wife's memory. That knowledge brought a deep and lasting satisfaction no victory in court could ever match. That night I went to bed early. For the first time in 2 years, my sleep was unbroken and calm. In my dreams, Margaret was there, smiling, her eyes bright with pride. "You did the right thing, Alan," she said. "I'm proud of you. Justice had been served. Love had demanded hard choices, but they had been the right ones. Rest in peace, my love." If you like this story, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your thoughts in the comments. To hear the next story, click on the box on the left. Thank you for watching.